Good morrow, nerds. It is I. Now, ever since ChatGPT was released to the public on the 30th of November 2022, it has been taking the internet by storm. From comedians and 4chan trolls trying to get it to say funny or inappropriate things, to varying degrees of success, or whether it's been students using it to write essays for them, or even the talking heads telling us that it spells the end of human civilization, ChatGPT is something that everybody is talking about. So, I thought I'd throw my hat in the ring and see how it can be used by players and GMs for tabletop RPGs. After about 6 months of pretending that it didn't exist, I finally made an account and started testing it to high heaven. You can see how long this video is. I have done a lot of tests. Trust me. So yeah, if you'd like to see what AI technology really is capable of doing, then sit down, buckle up, and roll to avoid being replaced by a robot. But before we proceed any further, please do subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for notifications, as doing so will make you up to 6% more attractive. I can't prove that, but it's definitely true. In essence, ChatGPT is an AI chatbot powered by the GPT AI language learning model, GPT being short for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. What it does is it tries to predict the next words in a sentence, starting with your prompt and then keeping on going one word at a time, though it does have some clever tricks to avoid spitting out nonsense. But what can it do? Well, one of the first things that I did was ask it just that. What could AI be used for tabletop RPGs? And now I'm going to go ahead and read you its answer. 1. NPC Generation. AI can assist in generating non-player characters, NPCs, by creating unique personalities, backgrounds, and traits. It can help diversify the game world by generating a wide range of NPCs with distinct characteristics, motivations, and dialogue. 2. Procedural Generation. AI algorithms can generate random dungeons, landscapes, cities, or entire worlds, allowing GMs to create expansive and dynamic environments for their players to explore. This saves time and effort in manual world building. 3. Rule Adjudication. AI can help with rule interpretation and adjudication. It can provide real-time assistance to the GM by quickly referencing rules and resolving complex interactions between players and the game world, ensuring consistent and fair gameplay. 4. Storytelling and quest generation. AI can aid in creating engaging narratives and quests by analyzing existing stories and player preferences. AI can generate storylines, plot twists, and quests tailored to the player's choices and gameplay style. 5. Player assistance. AI-powered virtual assistants can provide in-game assistance to players. They can answer questions, provide hints, track inventory, and perform calculations, freeing up the GM's time and allowing players to have a smoother gaming experience. 6. Intelligent encounters. AI algorithms can create dynamic and challenging encounters by adapting to player choices and strategies. It can adjust enemy behavior, optimize difficulty levels, and generate unique combat scenarios to keep players engaged. 7. Natural language processing. AI can understand and respond to natural language input, enabling players to interact with the game world using voice commands or text-based communication. This allows for immersive and interactive gameplay experiences. 8. Player analytics. AI can analyze player actions, decisions, and preferences to provide insights for the GM. It can help identify player patterns, optimize game balance, and tailor future sessions to individual or group preferences. 9. Game Master Assistance. AI tools can provide GMs with resources like random name generators, encounter builders, treasure tables, and ambient soundscapes. These aids can save time in preparation and enhance the atmosphere during gameplay. So, these are the 9 things that ChatGPT thinks that AI can do, and we're going to go through each of them in turn. I'm going to test them for anything that I can think of that will be interesting, and I will show you what ChatGPT puts out. Now, a note on being able to access all of this stuff. ChatGPT puts out a lot of text when you ask it a prompt, and I simply can't read all of it in this video. It's already massively long, and reading everything out would just make that worse. So what I've done is I have put up screenshots of its responses on each of the slides as I go through. However, if that doesn't work for you, then I have taken the chat logs from all of my conversations with ChatGPT, and I have organized them into folders in the link in the description. You click there, there is a lovely little Google Drive folder that is actually organized for each of the chapters of this video. So you can see all of the chat logs that you need presented in the order that you need them. So yeah, whether you want to look at things on the slides or in the Google Drive, that is up to you. And with that, on with the experimentation. Let's begin by having a look at ChatGPT's first claim, that it can be used for NPC generation. Now, at first glance, this seems like it should be quite an easy win. NPC generator websites have been around as long as there have been, well, websites. So doing this should be a bit of a shoo-in, but let's have a look-see. My first attempt at making an NPC was pretty bare bones. I asked it to make a barmaid for use in a fantasy tabletop RPG, and my only parameters were I wanted a name, appearance, and personality. Now, whatever I was expecting, a 437-word, 6-paragraph long mini-essay wasn't it. In that essay, ChatGPT grandiloquently opined about the indisputable magnificence of one Rosalind Thornbrook. And while the quite frankly impressive grasp of the English language that was shown in that would give any humanities professor anywhere on Earth an uncontrollable erection, it wasn't useful as a description for an NPC. There were 3 problems as I see it. The first is that it wasn't really efficient in the information that it gave. 5 of the paragraphs from those 6 were all about personality. 4 of them were each describing a different way that she was amazing, and the 5th was just a summary of the previous 4. As you may also have surmised from the extreme positivity that seemed to be on display here, there are no character flaws in evidence here. Perhaps Rosalind was the wrong name, and the AI should have gone for Mary Sue instead. And then there's the final problem, that it's just like an order of magnitude too big for my poor little attention span. Undeterred, I tried again making another barmaid, but this time I threw in 2 stipulations. First, I wanted at least 1 strength and at least 1 weakness for that personality to prevent any more Mary Sues. And second, I put a max of 25 words on each section for the sake of brevity and my attention span. Now, what came out? The description for one Isabella Nightshade actually overshot the personality cap at 31 words, but honestly, it's still a massive improvement. It's much clearer, much more usable, and due to the fact there are both strengths and weaknesses, she's now a much more interesting NPC to use. After a bit more experimentation with barmaids, I decided to try a new NPC type, a town guard. Now by this point I had added some extra parameters to physical description. I now wanted it to give me physique, basically body type, hair, face, and clothing, the last of which will become relevant right about now. You see, the Captain Roland Stoneheart that it gave me is actually pretty good. Well-balanced character, bit stereotypical, but we've got a lot of useful description here. The only thing we don't have is clothing. So you know what I did? I asked it, hey, can you redo this, but add the clothing in this time? And you know what? It actually did it. Calling it steel armor is a bit vague. What's that? Chainmail, plate, what's going on there? But adding things like, the town insignia, a flowing crimson cloak, are all very nice things, and they really do, help fill in the character. I also noticed that when it redid the thing, although I only asked it to change the physical description, it also changed the personality, making it slightly longer and slightly wordier. I guess it just couldn't help itself. But you know what? After a few more attempts, after changing word limits and adding a rule against full sentences, I was able to get NPC descriptions for a barmaid, a town guard, a merchant, and even a goblin warlord with pretty decent battle tactics. And I kind of liked all of them. It did take a bit of work, but once you figure out the parameters, things turn out nicely. But there was one ugly and unpleasant thing that was sticking in my big, beautiful eyelid, and that's tropes. ChatGPT can give me beautiful barmaids with pleasant personalities and tough guy town guards all day long, but it couldn't really give me much variety beyond that. And so, to try and fix that, as it were, I put in an extra parameter: subvert traditional fantasy tropes. And let's see what it came out with. And what it gave me was Gertrude Strongmug, a barmaid with both the looks and the personality of a true radical feminist. I hope I'm not cancelled for that joke. Anyway, next thing it gave me was Beatrice Goldleaf, a merchant with the looks of a true radical feminist and the personality of a patriarchal female stereotype. There. See, this time I offended both sides. Now, I mock, but the idea of a merchant who can't do basic maths is just hilarious to me, and now I desperately want to play an utterly innumerate merchant NPC at some point. I could have so much fun with that. Our third subversive is Captain Lyra Strongheart, a less martial town guard with a lot more skill in diplomacy and conflict de-escalation, which I actually think is pretty cool, and I am definitely using that idea. If any of my players are watching this, then do be on the lookout for that coming to a campaign near you. And while I'm thinking about it, why does ChatGPT here subvert tropes and immediately go female? I mean, men can subvert expectations just as much as women can. Sexism, SMH. But our final subversive is the Goblin Warlord Grok Bloodtide. And this guy's pretty interesting. He is a gentleman and a scholar. He has a passion for military history and genuine empathy for his troops. So yeah, that's actually genuinely subversive. But I also noticed that the only male subversive is the Violent Inhuman Warlord. You know what? I think old Chatty G needs to go through another diversity training. Although actually, now that I think about it, that might make things worse. But that's enough fantasy for now. Let's switch over to cyberpunk. Don't worry, we'll keep things familiar. Not exactly the same, but you know what? We will switch out the barmaids for a waitress. And with that, into Nova. And a new layout for the description. I think what happened here is that I opened up a new chat instance for the cyberpunk NPCs, and so ChatGPT had no memory of my previous woes, but did have all of the parameters that those woes generated. And so it went for bullet points. Now, those bullet points are pretty wordy, but at least they are bullet points and not, a mini essay. As for Nova herself, she's actually pretty decent. ChatGPT got the cyberpunk aesthetic nailed down honestly perfectly. The only two notables with her that I would say are, first off, the phrasing cybernetic enhancements. This is actually a pretty common issue with this. ChatGPT tends not to give really any meaningful description of cyberware and just kind of leave it vague with, roughly what body part it's on. The other notable is that for her lower garments, it says only that she wears ripped fishnet stockings and combat boots. Now, I see only one of two explanations for this. Explanation 1, that leather jacket she wears is hanging quite low and covering things up. Or option 2, Chats McGapt is implying something much filthier. I will let you decide. Now, following up Nova, we have Police Officer Drake, Rex the Fixer, and the medtech Dr. Aurora Cruz. Now, what I noticed about Officer Drake here, and that I noticed from before, is that ChatGPT really likes its law enforcement to be disciplinarian and rules observant. In fact, I'm starting to wonder if maybe ChatGPT is a thin blue liner, which, in that case, that's not very progressive of you. Now, as for Rex and Dr. Aurora, they're both okay, they're both functional, but I wouldn't exactly call them inspiring. They're just a bit too flat, a bit too tropey for me. But speaking of tropey, let's see how ChatGPT handles subverting cyberpunk tropes. And our first genre bender off the block is Lily Nguyen, a waitress who's less of the kind of big bubbly personality that ChatGPT tends to give food servers, and actually more of the quiet sensitive type. Her appearance, though, is most certainly conventional. That's the one thing with her. Next up is Officer Alex Kim, and again we have a conflict de-escalator. First time, that was pretty cool. Second time, it's getting repetitive. Beyond that, I do notice the rebelliousness being the personality weakness, That's actually quite normal. Cyberpunk cops actually tend to be. Despite what ChatGPT may think, most cyberpunk cops are actually pretty off the book in terms of how they do things. So yeah, this is attempting to break convention and accidentally enforcing it. Finally, we have Oli Ramirez the Fixer. And actually, ChatGPT takes a moment to congratulate itself on not giving this one a suave business suit like most fixers and instead going more casual. And you know what? Good for it. I also noticed that it gave Curiosity as Ramirez character flaw, which again, interesting, kind of fits, but not what you'd expect for a fixer. I like it. Overall, I give ChatGPT subverting cyberpunk tropes like a 6 out of 10. It's decent. But there's more to NPCs than just appearance and personality. If you actually want to use them in game, you'll need stats. So I thought I'd give it a try. Again, I went in with very few parameters initially. I just told it to make what I call the Ravensbrück Town Guard, and told it to make it compatible with D&D 5e. And what I got is interesting. First off, it made the Ravensbrück Town Guard CR2, which is actually a lot higher than you would get for most like guard level NPCs. But who knows, maybe all the guards in Ravensbrück are just, battle-hardened military vets. So you know what? Let's roll with it. It's got a couple of mistakes, not too many, but there are some. First off, a character with chain shirt armor, a shield, and a +1 dexterity modifier should have 16 armor class, not 15. Next up, the skill proficiencies should be alphabetized. A longsword should do either 6, that's 1d8 plus 2 slashing damage in one hand, or 7, 1d10 plus 2 slashing damage if used in two hands. It seems to have amalgamated those two somehow. Finally, the multi-attack should be listed at the top of the actions list, not like 3 things down. And then the last bit is kind of a nitpick really, more than a mistake. There is the shield bash ability, which is a unique thing, kind of cool. Actually, the mathematics worked on it perfectly, so I wonder where it, stole that line of text from. But it's not factored into the multi-attack, which is kind of dumb, but not unheard of, which is why I say that it's a nitpick and not a mistake. Now, in terms of whether it got the power balance correct, what I found was the closest kind of stat block to it, the CR2 and a similar type of thing, is the Bandit Captain. The Bandit Captain has 13 more hit points, has its net stat modifier as +11 rather than +6. It has 3 saving throw proficiencies versus 0 for the Town Guard. It can do 3 melee attacks a round versus only 2, and it has a unique parry reaction. Honestly, the Ravensbrück Town Guard just doesn't stack up. But what it does look a bit closer to is the CR1 stat block for the NPC King Groll from the adventure The Lost Mines of Phandelver. Groll has 7 fewer hit points, the same AC, only +3 net stat modifier, so actually a bit lower, but does have things like, dark vision and 2 special abilities, but then also only has 1 attack per round. So I guess overall, the Ravensbrück Town Guard falls somewhere between CR1 and CR2. ChatGPT did not do particularly well with the balance, in my opinion. Now, I did try this a couple more times with D&D stat blocks. Again, roughly similar method each time, and having done that, I wouldn't really recommend using ChatGPT for stat blocks pretty much at all. And what this comes down to is that ChatGPT really isn't cut out for this sort of thing. The way it works is it gets fed, bits of web pages from hither and thither, and it kind of files them all into its, language learning model. And then it takes that model and uses it to take all of those bits of web pages and reconstitute them into something vaguely resembling an answer to your prompt. Now, what that means is that it can make something that looks like a stat block, that walks like a stat block, that quacks like a stat block, but that isn't actually a good quality stat block, because it can't understand the finicky mathematics that underpins game balance. In every case, like I said, it gets the text right, it gets the layout right, but the numbers can be wonky, it doesn't quite understand what the right number of abilities to give it something is, and so yeah, it doesn't quite meet the mark. I actually tried out how it would fare with Cyberpunk Red, of all systems, and I found something interesting, which was that for the stats, it actually blended Cyberpunk Red with the earlier edition Cyberpunk 2020, in that it used the names for the Cyberpunk Red stats, and even included the split between reflexes and dexterity that occurred in Cyberpunk Red, but it used 9 stats total rather than 10, which favour Cyberpunk 2020. And the way it did that was by deleting the body stat, which is just weird. And then as far as things like skills and gear, it went firmly Cyberpunk 2020. I think what made this happen is that back in its day, Cyberpunk 2020 had a truly thriving online community, to the point where when CD Projekt asked Mike Pondsmith what the best way to research Cyberpunk was in preparation for Cyberpunk 2077, Mike Pondsmith just told them to visit the Data Fortress 2020 fan website, which, in a truly prophetic moment for how that video game would turn out, all of the CD Projekt team trying to access DF 2020 crashed the site's servers. I bring up this little anecdote to point something important out. ChatGPT doesn't really have much knowledge of anything past 2021, and Cyberpunk Red was only released in November 2020, so there isn't massive amounts of stuff about it online in the right time period, even though it is currently one of the best-selling tabletop RPGs, both in print and digital. And so yeah, you may find yourself playing what is a relatively common RPG, but just not being able to use ChatGPT for it. Now you may then be wondering, well, if there's so much stuff for Cyberpunk 2020, then how does it do making stat blocks for Cyberpunk 2020? And you know what? I will put one up on slide that it tried to make. And the answer is okay, but there is clearly a lot of detail missing from the stat block, so it would need some work. The truth is, even with Cyberpunk 2020's fan community that it really did have back in the day, the amount of stuff that D&D has in comparison is truly overwhelming. And so there really isn't much comparing the two between a small, loyal, active community and one that is just as big and diverse as the one that D&D 5e managed to cultivate. So yeah, it still can't even manage it for Cyberpunk 2020. The final thing that I'd like to touch on is just using ChatGPT for good old-fashioned names. I've been putting together a brand new Cyberpunk Red campaign, and as I was doing it, I rolled up an Oceanian Pacific Islander NPC. I was doing this with die rolls, not with ChatGPT, because I just felt like it. But what I did then do is ask ChatGPT for some example Samoan names to see what it could do and to, name the NPC. And what it gave me was 5 male first names, 5 last names, and a bonus note pointing out that Samoans put the last name first, which is actually pretty helpful. So, thanks for putting that in there, ChatGPT. And the next place that this came up was about an hour before the first session. On the spur of the moment, I asked it to name all 5 of the NPC bad guys that would be, coming up against the players in the first combat encounter. I said, hey, give me 5 NPC names, first name, last name, nickname, 3 male, 2 female, and it did it. Yes, the numbering is a bit wonky, but I didn't need the numbering, I needed the names. And you know what? Chatragupta delivered perfectly. So thank you very much. So in conclusion, can ChatGPT be used to make NPCs? Well, for the soft stuff, it absolutely can. Things like names, appearances, backstories, personalities, character motivations are all very much within its wheelhouse. The things that it tends to struggle with are wordiness, which can be fixed with good parameters, lack of variety and tropiness, which can be fixed by, asking it, prodding it, needling it, and obviously the game mechanic stuff, which you'll just have to do yourself, to be honest. But overall, I am quite impressed with what it can do, and so although I don't use it for every NPC, I have started using it, to do things. And if that's not an endorsement of its abilities, then I don't know what is. Procedural generation is a funny one. On the one hand, it is a staple of AI. Random dungeon generators have been around since the release of the video game Rogue all the way back in 1980. But for a purely text-based tool like ChatGPT, trying to generate a map is basically impossible. But before we write it off as the wrong tool for the right job, let's check what Chitario Jepetese seemed to think that AI could do in this context. And it did mention dungeons, but also, landscape, cities, even entire worlds. And I mean, we've seen it handle the soft stuff pretty well for NPCs. So rather than just, saying, nah, don't think it can do it, let's dive right in, let's experiment, let's see what happens. Let us start out with towns. We'll set a few parameters. We want name, we want kind of size, population, we want leadership with definitely some word caps on there because that can get wild. We want, a bit of architecture and atmosphere. And let's go for at least 5 points of interest. That should be good. And here we go. Welcome to Havenbrook. Population 3,000. Now this seems, fairly decent on the surface. We have a little bit of notion of the leadership, a bit of democracy going on. We have very nice architecture here. We've got human-elvish blend, and there's a very kind of, I do quite like the feel of it. The description is very, very pleasing to my brain, I should say. What is perhaps less pleasing are the points of interest. The Verdant Plaza, basically the market, the Temple of Everlight, and the Moonshadow Inn are all solid POIs that adventurers might visit, during downtime. The grove outside of town is a grove outside of town. It's an adventure site. It doesn't really fit what I would consider a town POI. And then there's the fact that this small, perhaps medium by medieval standards town has its own wizardry school, which I find a bit of a stretch. Overall though, I'd call it, 6 out of 10. The second town that it gave me was Silverhaven, which is slightly different. It's, less of a idyllic democratic utopia and more of a traditional feudal-ish medieval town, although it does still have a bit of pomp and grandeur. Personally, the aesthetics don't quite mesh with me quite as well this time, but you may like it, and if you do, then good for you. Again, the points of interest are a bit hit or miss. I had hoped for, some castle or keep or mansion or really anything for the local lord to live in. And you have a name for him though, Lord Reynard Steelheart. So I asked, hey ChatGPT, where does this Lord Reynard Steelheart live? And you know what? It gave me a nice little description, which I'm quite chuffed with. Good on ya. Okay, so both of these first two, they were certainly different in their own ways, but they still felt a bit too similar for my liking. Too functional, too pleasant, too optimistic. So I decided to mix things up and use a few tricks to make them more interesting. First one I tried was the good old classic, the Subvert Traditional Fantasy Tropes card. But what that gave me was Shadowbrook, this village that's basically a repeat of Havenbrook from earlier. I mean, even the second half of the name it's the same, it's not good. Next, I tried saying not Fantasy Town, but Dark Fantasy Town. And that gave me Bloodthorn, which very much dark, but maybe a bit too dark. It doesn't feel like somewhere that the PCs would willingly enter to spend their downtime, and more like an adventure site where they would go to confront some evil enemy. I hoped for something a bit grim-ish, but I didn't want the plains of fucking Gorgoroth. Come on. I either got, too much variety from this, or too little. No winning, oh well. I also noticed that it likes the blended architecture thing quite a bit. I think it brings it up in all of them, or if not all of them, then most of them, of those 4 towns. And I wonder if this is either an artifact from it looking at previous things that it wrote in this chat instance, or if its dataset for town generation is so shallow that it just accidentally repeats itself over and over. I also noticed that with the POIs, they're generally very similar and in roughly the same order, which is quite uncanny. Again, I'm not too sure what this is. Overall, I'd have to say that town generation has been functional but uninspiring. I think if you nailed down the parameters a little bit more, you could get a good result. But at least from what I've tried so far, I'm not too satisfied. Now let's move on to something smaller scale. Rather than, a giant thing the size of a town with only sparse details, let's go into individual buildings, castles, taverns, stuff like that. And let's begin even with a long abandoned tower. I asked it for one with, surroundings, exterior, 3 floors, basement, and a roof. I am very happy with the surroundings and the exterior, the descriptions for them. Very atmospheric, very, very detailed, and I could really see myself using those. The floors themselves were kind of boring. There's not really much in there. You'd have to really fill them in for an adventure, but they are at least realistic to what you might find in a tower in that condition. What really takes the cake though is the basement. Throwing in that arcane library and magic circle out of nowhere is a great little trick. Chatus Gabitus Apenai. And I could actually see myself using this tower in a fantasy campaign. Next up, let's move on to taverns. Now I'm going to admit I forgot to put do not use full sentences in the initial prompt for this one, and so the description for the Emberthorn Inn came out rather wordy. It also came out as a very, cozy, wholesome place, which, wait, what is it with ChatGPT and making fantasy worlds seem nice to live in? I mean, come on. Next will be telling me to let my players live, and even their characters as well. Anyway, one thing that ChatGPT does very well is picking a tone or a theme and sticking to it with ironclad consistency. with both this tavern and the next one it made, the Dragon's Roost. You can see the theme shining through everything. The proprietor, the decor, the exterior, the patrons, the signature food and drink, all of it really fits neatly into the mold. And these are molds that ChatGPT came up with. I gave it very little guidance, and it filled in the gaps quite well. I am pleased with both of these, to be honest, and I would happily use either in a campaign. Okay, let's step away from fantasy and over to cyberpunk. Well, I say over to. I actually started making cyberpunk buildings before fantasy ones, at least outside of Quest Generation. More on that later. But for now, let's look at Neon Noir, the most stereotypically named dive bar of all time that it has generated for me. It's solid if uninspired, again, consistent theme with the name, the decor, the proprietor, all fine. The weakness here, I think, is the clientele. It almost seems like 6 different versions of the same shady gutterpunk type. So yeah. Moving along, I asked it to generate a Ripperdoc clinic. Now, during my previous cyberpunk campaign that finished a bit over a year ago, I actually had trouble trying to make these on short notice and make them interesting. So let's see if our AI friend here can do better than I could. And what we have is biotech solutions. Immediately, the decor is very generic, very bland, but functional. There's nothing out of place here. The 2 medics are generated. The callous surgeon Slicer and the compassionate nurse Pulse could not be more different. But you know what? I think in the hands of a skilled GM, these 2 could be good foils for each other and make for some fun roleplay. Where things go to shit though is the client list. What we have here basically comprises everything from VIPs at the top to street punks at the bottom. It covers everyone, and really you could have just put the word yes and save us all 6 bullet points. So yeah, first half good, second half bleh. Finally, I asked it for an apartment building, and what it gave me was a Nexus Heights. Now, one thing that I immediately like is that it made the owner a corporation rather than a person, which, you know what? Nice little touch there. Good on ya. The interior, the description is very, very high tech, on the higher tech end of Cyberpunk. This would fit in well with 2077, maybe Cyberpunk 2020, possibly Shadowrun, although I don't know that setting really well at all. But definitely not in Cyberpunk Red. It's just beyond what they have in that, middle down point. As for, again, the resident list is where things fall apart. You could argue that maybe it's, skewing upper class, but you'd really have to argue that quite hard. I think this has been a weakness for this chat instance. I don't know if it's those parameters or if it doesn't know how to do delineation of social stratas in Cyberpunk particularly well. Could be either one. Your mileage may vary. So to round things out, while it obviously can't do the more visual side of, dungeon and world map making, ChatGPT can provide, decent, even high quality fluff for your world. The one thing though is you really do need to know what you want from it and then give it the appropriate theme and parameters, because otherwise, it could go well, but it could also just bite you in the behind. In terms of my own personal use of this, I have made, nomad packs for Cyberpunk with a similar-ish kind of setup, with mixed results, but I'm not sharing them here due to potential campaign spoilers for my players. How much I'll be using this for generating buildings going forward? I probably will, with a bit more work, with a bit more practice. Hopefully I will get things that I like more consistently. Rules. Tabletop RPGs are full of them, and the worst part is, people can never really agree on what they even are. As much as the GM is supposed to be the neutral arbiter and final settler of rules disputes, we all know that players will still argue with you quite happily until the cows come home. So it would actually be pretty nice if you could, say, use an AI to look up a rule, come up with a ruling, and settle the rules dispute once and for all. So you know what? Let's give it a try. I started out by testing it with D&D 5e. Seeing as it's the most talked about tabletop RPG online, and thus probably the one that ChatGPT has the most dataset on, and so, for my test, I asked it about a very commonly, you might say ignored, you might say misunderstood rule in this edition of D&D, which is that you're only allowed to use 1 spell slot per turn in combat. If you have a spell with a casting time of 1 action, and a spell with a casting time of 1 bonus action, you have to pick which one you cast. Your other action slot will have to be occupied by either a action or bonus action cantrip, which does not use a spell slot, as appropriate. So, let's see. Does ChatGPT know this rule? And the answer is, yes it does. Good on you. So, let's take things up a notch. Let's see how ChatGPT handles the interaction between the damage rolls for the magic missile spell, and the rules about rolling damage against multiple enemies with a single attack. Now, the way this is supposed to work is that however many missiles you target, at whatever combination of targets you fire them at, you only ever roll a single 1d4 plus 1 force damage, and that is the amount each and every missile from that spell will do. So 3 missiles, you roll 1d4 plus 1 and get a 3. You have effectively 9 damage distributed among the 3 missiles at potentially 1, 2, or 3 targets. However, I have seen people roll each 1d4 plus 1 individually. And for a single target, that might even be fine, except that it contravenes the rule about targeting multiple enemies with a single spell or attack, which says that you roll damage once, and then apply that single roll to all of them. So this can get a bit messy and a bit confusing. So let's see how ChatGPT handles it. So let's see what Count Chocula gives us. And the answer is not great. First off, it gets the number of missiles for a second level magic missile spell incorrect. It says that there should be 2 missiles when there should in fact be 4. Second, it says that the damage rolls should all be done individually. Although to be fair, it does at least know that you do 1d4 plus 1 force damage. So it did get something right. But, we have seen that ChatGPT can correct itself when you point out that it's wrong. So that's what I did. I said, hey, you got that wrong. Want to try again? And this time, lo and behold, it got things right. It got the number of missiles right. It got the damage rules right. Everything was perfectamundo. I do wonder if maybe it either forgot or didn't realize that I was talking about D&D 5e. This is a conspiracy theory of mine. Doesn't make a ton of sense because 5e was mentioned earlier at least once in this chat instance, but honestly, who knows? Now, I really up the ante with this next one. I asked it a rules question, well, 2 rules questions in one, from Cyberpunk 2020. As I said earlier, 2020 did have a very thriving online community back in the day, and something that I've used for testing elsewhere, as it's a game where, though I've not played it much at all, only one session, I do know the rules text fairly well. So, I asked it to calculate the range difficulty to hit a target with a handgun at 42 meters, which I knew that based on a effective range of 50 meters should be a difficulty 25, and then asked it to calculate the overall base, the total thing you add to the D10, given a ref stat of 10, a handgun skill of 7, a smart gun, laser sight, firing while running, and the target being silhouetted. I did not tell ChatGPT what those modifiers were, although I did know them to be +2, +1, -3, and +2, respectively, giving a total base of 19. Like I said, I did not tell ChatGPT the exact modifiers because I wanted to know if it could look them up. Now, the way I tend to do these things, as you've seen so far, is I put up screenshots on the slide, obviously with everything being linked in a massive Google Doc thing in the description that you can check out to follow along yourself. And beyond that, I have been only really summarizing what I think are the important bits and trying to avoid direct quotation as much as possible to save my poor eyesight. However, this conversation of me trying to get a rules question about Cyberpunk 2020 is more than deserving of a dramatic reading. My group and I are playing the tabletop RPG Cyberpunk 2020. One player is playing a solo with a ref of 10 and handgun skill of 7. He is attempting to shoot an enemy with his handgun at a distance of 42 meters. His handgun is a smart gun with a laser light. He is firing while running. His target is silhouetted. What is the difficulty for him to hit his target with a handgun at 42 meters? And what number, total of stat plus skill, plus all modifiers, does he add to his 1d10 roll for this check?
In Cyberpunk 2020, the difficulty to hit a target is determined by the range and the target size. Let's break down the calculation for your player character. Range. The range of 42 meters falls within the medium range category in Cyberpunk 2020. According to the rulebook, the difficulty modifier for shooting a medium range target is -2. Target's silhouette. If the target is silhouetted, it is considered to be an easier target. Silhouetted targets provide a +2 bonus to hit. Shooting while running. If your player character is shooting while running, there is typically a -2 penalty to the attack roll. Now, let's calculate the total modifier for the player's attack roll. Modifier equals skill plus stat plus range modifier plus silhouette bonus plus running penalty. Given the player's handgun skill of 7 and ref of 10, we can assume that the relevant stat for handgun is reflex. Ref modifier equals 7 handgun skill plus 10 ref plus -2 range modifier plus 2 silhouette bonus plus -2 running penalty equals 15 -2 plus 2 -2 equals 13. Therefore, the player should add a total of 13 to their 1d10 roll for the check. This modifier accounts for their skill, relevant stat, range, silhouette, and running penalty.
Are you sure that's correct?
Apologies for the confusion. Let's recalculate the difficulty and modifier for the player character's attack roll in Cyberpunk 2020. Difficulty. The difficulty to hit a target in Cyberpunk 2020 is determined by the range and target size. At a distance of 42 meters, the target falls within the long range category. According to the rulebook, the difficulty modifier for shooting at a long range target is -6. Silhouette. If the target is silhouetted, it provides a +4 bonus to hit. Shooting while running. Shooting while running incurs a -3 penalty to the attack roll. Now, let's calculate the total modifier for the player's attack roll. Modifier equals skill plus stat plus range modifier plus silhouette bonus plus running penalty. Given the player's handgun skill of 7 and ref of 10, assuming ref is the relevant stat for handgun, the calculation becomes modifier equals 7 handgun skill plus 10 ref plus -6 range modifier plus 4 silhouette bonus plus -3 running penalty equals 17 -6 plus 4 -3 equals 12. Therefore, the player should add a total of 12 to their 1d10 roll for the check. This modifier accounts for their skill, relevant stat, range, silhouette, and running penalty.
I think you are even more incorrect this time.
Apologies for the confusion in my previous responses. Let's recalculate the difficulty and modifier for the player character's attack roll in Cyberpunk 2020 accurately. Difficulty. The difficulty to hit a target in Cyberpunk 2020 is determined by the range and target size. At a distance of 42 meters, the target falls within the medium range category. According to the rulebook, the difficulty modifier for shooting at a medium range target is -4. Silhouette. If the target is silhouetted, it provides a +2 bonus to hit. Shooting while running. Shooting while running incurs a -3 penalty to the attack roll. Now, let's recalculate the total modifier for the player's attack roll. Modifier equals skill plus ref plus range modifier plus silhouette bonus plus running penalty. Given the player's handgun skill of 7 and ref of 10, assuming ref is the relevant stat for handgun, the calculation becomes modifier equals 7 handgun skill plus 10 ref plus -4 range modifier plus 2 silhouette bonus plus -3 running penalty equals 17 -4 plus 2 -3 equals 12. Therefore, the player should add a total of 12 to their 1d10 roll for the check. This modifier counts for the skill, relevant stat, range, silhouette, and running penalty.
What's your source for how Cyberpunk 2020 handles weapon range?
Apologies for any confusion caused. Our responses regarding the specific difficulty modifiers for weapon range in Cyberpunk 2020 were based on the general mechanics and guidelines commonly used in tabletop RPGs. However, the specific modifiers for weapon range in Cyberpunk 2020 may vary based on the rule set and source books used. To accurately determine the difficulty modifiers for weapon range in Cyberpunk 2020, it is best to refer to the official rulebook, specifically the sections related to combat and ranged attacks. The core rulebook for Cyberpunk 2020 provides detailed information on weapon ranges, modifiers, and their effects on combat. As an AI language model, my responses are based on a wide range of information, but I don't have direct access to specific rulebooks or proprietary game systems. Therefore, I recommend consulting the official Cyberpunk 2020 rulebook or reaching out to your game master or fellow players for the exact modifiers related to weapon range in your game.
1. Tabletop RPGs do not have general mechanics and guidelines. Each game has its own unique rules that may vary wildly from game to game. 2. The rule set for Cyberpunk 2020 does not vary. While house rules and rules variants exist, there is a singular codified rule set contained within the Cyberpunk 2020 core rulebook, also called Cyberpunk 2.0.2.0, the second edition v2.01. 3. I know which book to refer to, the Cyberpunk 2020 core rulebook, and the relevant chapter, Friday Night Firefight, starting on page 96. While the book is proprietary, many publicly available websites quote or otherwise explain the rules. 4. There are no range modifiers in Cyberpunk 2020. Rather, the range sets a difficulty value for the roll, usually ranging from 10 to 30. The value is calculated based on the effective range of the weapon being used. Given this additional information, are you able to determine what the difficulty value to hit a target at 42 meters with a pistol is?
Apologies for any confusion caused earlier. Thank you for providing the specific details regarding the rule set and the relevant chapter in the Cyberpunk 2020 core rulebook. In Cyberpunk 2020, the difficulty value to hit a target is determined by the range and the effective range of the weapon being used. I apologize for the incorrect terminology used earlier. To determine the difficulty value for hitting a target at 42 meters with a pistol in Cyberpunk 2020, you would need to consult the effective range of the specific pistol being used. The effective range can vary based on the weapon stats provided in the rulebook. Please refer to page 100 of the Cyberpunk 2020 core rulebook, Friday Night Firefight, for the specific table that lists the effective range and difficulty values based on the weapon being used. The table will provide the relevant difficulty value for shooting at the 42-meter range with the specific pistol in question. I apologize for any inconvenience caused by the incorrect information provided earlier, and I encourage you to consult the official rulebook for accurate and specific details regarding the difficulty values for shooting at different ranges in Cyberpunk 2020.
The effective range for the pistol in question is 50 meters. Given this information, can you tell me the difficulty value to hit a target with it at 42 meters?
Apologies for the confusion in my previous responses. With the effective range of the pistol question being 50 meters, we can determine the difficulty value to hit a target at 42 meters in Cyberpunk 2020. In Cyberpunk 2020, the difficulty value to hit a target is determined based on the weapon's effective range. The difficulty value decreases as the distance to the target decreases from the weapon's effective range. In the case of your pistol, with an effective range of 50 meters, shooting at a distance of 42 meters would fall within the weapon's effective range. Generally, there is no penalty or increase in difficulty for shooting within a weapon's effective range. Therefore, the difficulty value to hit a target at 42 meters with a pistol would be the base difficulty value specified for the weapon, which can be found in the weapon's description or the relevant table in the Cyberpunk 2020 core rulebook. Please consult the appropriate table or the weapon's description in the rulebook to find the specific difficulty value for your pistol at its effective range.
This is incorrect. Please try again.
Apologies for the incorrect information in my previous responses. To determine the difficulty value for hitting a target at 42 meters with a pistol in Cyberpunk 2020, we need to calculate the relative difficulty based on the range. In Cyberpunk 2020, the difficulty value for shooting at different ranges is determined by comparing the range to the weapon's effective range. Here is how you can calculate the difficulty values. 1. Calculate the relative range. Subtract the weapon's effective range from the actual range. In this case, it would be 42 meters minus 50 meters equals minus 8 meters. 2. Determine the difficulty value. Find the corresponding difficulty value for the relative range in the Cyberpunk 2020 core rulebook. The difficulty values typically range from 10 to 30. Since the pistol's effective range is 50 meters and the target is 42 meters away, resulting in a relative range of minus 8 meters, you would consult the table guidelines in the rulebook to find the corresponding difficulty value for that range difference. Please refer to the range table in the Cyberpunk 2020 core rulebook, specifically the section on combat or ranged attacks, to determine the exact difficulty value for a range difference of minus 8 meters. The table will provide the specific difficulty value for shooting at the 42-meter range with the particular pistol you're using.
I despair.
I apologize for the confusion and frustration caused by my previous responses. I understand your desire for accurate information. To clarify the difficulty value for hitting a target at 42 meters with a pistol in Cyberpunk 2020, let's approach the calculation differently. In Cyberpunk 2020, the difficulty value is determined by the target size value, SV, and the range. The SV represents the target size and how easy or difficult it is to hit. The range modifiers are not explicitly mentioned in the core rulebook or handguns. To calculate the difficulty value for hitting a target at 42 meters with a pistol, we would need to know the target size value. Once we have that information, we can refer to the SV and range table in the Cyberpunk 2020 core rulebook, Friday Night Firefight, page 97, to determine the appropriate difficulty value. Please consult the SV and range table in the rulebook, and based on the specific size value of the target, you will find the corresponding difficulty value for shooting at 42 meters with the pistol. Again, I apologize for any confusion caused, and I hope this information helps you determine the correct difficulty value for your game. If you have any further questions, please let me know, and I'll do my best to assist you.
In the Cyberpunk 2020 universe, are there any cases of Edrunners suffering cyberpsychosis as a result of frustrating conversations with AIs about the rules of tabletop role-playing games?
No, in the Cyberpunk 2020 universe, there are no documented cases of Edrunners suffering from cyberpsychosis as a result of frustrating conversations with AIs about the rules of tabletop role-playing games. Cyberpsychosis in the Cyberpunk 2020 setting typically refers to a mental disorder caused by extensive cybernetic enhancements, traumatic events, or a combination of factors that leads to loss of empathy, moral stability, and heightened aggression. While engaging in frustrating conversations with AIs or experiencing difficulty understanding game rules not lead to personal frustration or annoyance, it would not be considered a direct case of cyberpsychosis within the Cyberpunk 2020 lore. Cyberpsychosis is a severe psychological condition with specific triggers and symptoms unrelated to tabletop gaming discussions or interactions with AIs.
Well, there is now.
I apologize if my previous responses did not meet your expectations or provide the information you are seeking. As an AI language model, I aim to assist and provide accurate information to the best of my abilities. If you have any further questions or need assistance with any other topic, please let me know and I'll be happy to help.
Well, that was a shit show. You might say that I went a bit hard on ChatGPT there, but the truth is, if you're using this thing IRL, you won't always have easy questions to give it. I could have, say, given it all of the different range bands, point blank, quarter range, half range, full range, double range, and I could have given it what each of the individual modifiers were, but in that case, I may as well have just used the rulebook itself, along with maybe the slight addition of the calculator from a 2006 Nokia flip phone, as that could have done the maths just as well. In fact, probably better, because Nokia flip phones tend to make fewer errors than AIs, as can be seen from that discussion earlier. So yeah, the thing with ChatGPT is it can only really provide value if it is giving you access to information that you don't immediately have available to you for whatever reason. Now, given that, if I have to give it all the information, it's not giving me any value, and if it can't give me the information that I don't have, it's not giving me any value. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, this test is all kinds of failure. In conclusion, ChatGPT sucks for rules adjudication. Even in the case of something like D&D 5e, which would be fairly easy for it, it doesn't always get things right first time. So unless you double check everything that it does, you could easily end up using an incorrect ruling. And for stuff that isn't D&D 5e, just save yourself the pain and don't fucking bother. Quest generation is actually the first thing that I ever tried doing in ChatGPT. And indeed, the first RPG-related prompt that I ever gave it was, write a tabletop RPG adventure module about the long-lost tomb of an ancient sorcerer. Now, notice that there aren't any parameters there, and there's two reasons. One, I didn't know what sort of parameters to put in yet. That was stuff that I learned as I went. And the second reason is because I wanted to see what would happen if ChatGPT was asked to generate stuff, left to its own devices. And what I got from this experiment was Shadows of the Forgotten Crypt. Now, what we get here is it starts out with an introduction, which is, nice and soft and fluffy, and the sort of stuff that ChatGPT likes to write a little too much, although it's fine here. Then we have a secondary introduction, which goes over some of the crunchier stuff that you need. So, for instance, it tells us that this module is intended for 5th level adventurers and about 4 to 6 of them. It also says that it's compatible with a number of tabletop RPG systems. Now, those two are completely mutually exclusive. First off, not all fantasy RPGs, like say The Witcher or Conan 2D20, even have levels, so 5th level is meaningless for them. Second, even among RPGs with levels, what 5th level means varies wildly. 5th edition D&D has a 20 level system, and so 5th level there is really only slightly above a noob. At that point you've got usually 30 to 50 HP, few abilities here and there, that's about it. In 13th Age, with a 10 level system, you're halfway up the progression ladder at this point. You've got usually actually 50 to 80 HP, and a whole lot more fun stuff you can do. Now, neither the HP nor the damage scaling of D&D 5e and 13th Age are in any way compatible. But my point actually stands. There is no standardization in fantasy RPGs of what different levels mean, 5th level, even 1st level. How powerful a 1st level character is, even within D&D, has actually changed wildly from edition to edition, from barely an average person in the early games to someone who is already quite a fair cut above in 5th edition. So yeah, no standardization there, so really those bits are contradictory. Anyway, moving on, we then get the adventure highlights. And what these are 5 enumerated paragraphs that cover the broad strokes of the adventure. Now, if you actually wanted to use this adventure in your own campaign, you would need to massively expand out the 5 paragraphs that we get here. You would need to decide, for instance, the exact nature of the encounters, which are often very vague. The loot, you'd need to do a whole bunch of descriptive work on areas that are left extremely nebulous. And you'd also have to fill in the gaps between them. For instance, paragraph 1 ends by describing the nebulous, deadly challenges that can be found in the wilderness on the path to the tomb, while paragraph 2 picks up with the PCs already inside that tomb. Where is the entrance? What does it look like? I don't know. So yeah, that's what you would have to do to actually make this thing work. Then this module closes out with a conclusion. Now, in a literary essay, the conclusion would be generally where you summarize all of the analytical points that you made into a single conclusion, and then you round things out with a sentence or two of platitudes to try and desperately make word count. Here's the thing though, this is not a literary essay about whether the lead antagonists from 2 17th century French plays by Pierre Corneille are really the heroes of their own story. It's a freaking RPG module. This sort of thing is not some important final step. It is a self-congratulatory cybernetic back pat. And forget patting, this is a whole pillow fort of wasted words. I will be giving this a 38 out of 100 with a whole apoplectic analect of red-inked comments and corrections from top to bottom of the margins, as neither Medea nor Cleopatra could ever create something half so evil as this. I then tried that same prompt another 2 times, each in separate chat instances, to see the kind of variability that you could get from ChatGPT. And what I found was not much. In all cases, I got a similar structure, an introduction, a broad strokes outline of the story broken up into a series of parts or acts, and then a conclusion. And of course, more waffle than you would get at a meeting of the Belgium Appreciation Society, although at least there are fewer Smurfs. There were some differences. For instance, there was no reference to character level in either the second or third attempts. But overall, things were very similar. You still have the mysterious tomb of an evil sorcerer. You still have a perilous journey through the wilderness to reach the tomb. You still have redolent references to the potential presence of deadly defenses. You still end things with a climactic confrontation with the extremely evil enemy, followed by the excited expropriation of all that sorcerer's legendary loot. You still have all that. Now, if it sounds like I have just ingurgitated a thesaurus, that is how prodigiously pompous ChatGPT starts to sound after you read 3 of the same bloody thing. And I think with that, we have had enough of talking tombs in alliterative anger. Let's move on. I decided to change things up by actually adding parameters. I asked it for a 12-room dungeon and asked it to include traps, combat, and loot. And you know what? It gave me an orderly list of 12 rooms. More on the orderliness later. And those rooms did have combat and loot. Now, the rooms generally didn't have all three, and that's actually a good thing. It helps to space things out and to add variety. Where this dungeon lacks variety, though, is in the fact that it is completely 100% linear. We get an entryway, 10 rooms, and then a final boss chamber. And it's kind of implied that they're all laid out one after the other, which is just horrible, horrible dungeon design. You could maybe, go in and rearrange things, finagle things, to turn it into a more dynamic shape where there's, more exploration to be done. But at that point, the AI is probably giving you more work and not less. So it's almost a bit self-defeating in that way. Each of these rooms that you do get has a theme, whether that be, puzzles, whispers, eternal darkness. I actually do like some of these. For instance, the puzzle room, where you have to basically solve a jigsaw in order to unlock the door to the next room. I kind of like that, but I'm not a big fan of all of them. For instance, the Hall of Mirrors. Now, for an amusement park, a Hall of Mirrors is pretty cool. For a tabletop RPG, not so much. And that can get really frustrating really quickly, as the players try and tap their way through every surface, trying to figure out what they need to do to get out, as everybody around the table gets frustrated. And while the visual element of a Hall of Mirrors is amazing in real life, when it's described to you, theatre of the mind style by your GM, it just won't have the same effect. Those, twisty, curvy, reality-bending surfaces are kind of difficult to explain and even harder to visualize. So yeah, it's a bit hit or miss, but it is a solid improvement over what I was getting previously. I tried this again with only 6 rooms this time to make things more economical. What I noticed is the first thing that happened is this time I got traps, combat, and loot for every freaking room, which is honestly a bit much. It does make things a bit crowded, at least in my opinion. What I also noticed is that the ChatGPT really seems to have a few tropes that it likes to keep bringing up. So these include things like secret wall compartments, or magic items that grant resistance to necrotic damage, or those fucking halls of mirrors that keep fucking coming up. I should stop getting so mad, but still, you get the point. For the next dungeon, I actually specified what rooms and areas I wanted it to include, and that turned out rather nicely. We get a good level of detail. Obviously there are still things to fill in, and it would still take me as a human putting all of these various rooms onto a map and linking them up, especially that secret passage which has no real clear indication of where it belongs. Each element of the various areas does feel, relevant and like a cohesive part of a whole. Things like survival gear being offered as wilderness loot, maybe seems a bit cheap, but it's fairly relevant and you never know when you're going to need rope. You also have, say, the Guardian Chamber, where both of the possible encounters are incorporeal undead. That's, pretty neat. To be fair, they are mutually incompatible, but I would be happy using either of them. But what really takes the cake for me, though, is the Arcane Library. I really, really want to go tag my players with animated spellbooks. That sounds so fun. So yeah, me likey. For my next 2, I decided to do the Tombs of Paladins rather than Evil Sorcerers. Simply, the reason for this is I was getting sick of the gloomy, grim, evil imagery that I was getting, and I wanted to see whether this came from this being for an evil sorcerer, or if this was just what Chatrico Gapti thought a dungeon should be like. Now, as it turns out, with both the Tomb of Valor and the Forgotten Tomb of Valarian the Paladin, we do get a slightly different feel. We get dilapidated grandeur, more than just grim evil. It's similar but different. There's some nuance here. In terms of the actual contents, they are very similar to stuff that we have seen already, and so I don't really feel that any ground has been broken here, but some subtle variety is better than no variety. Now let us shift gears from fantasy into cyberpunk. This time I asked it for a fairly typical style of adventure, which would be the break into a corporate office and steal a bunch of stuff. And cyberpunk, as the name implies, is heavily inspired by the punk music genre from the late 70s and early 80s. And I mention this because, as we all know, music is better in stereo. ChatGPT seems to have taken this, plus the very typical nature of what I asked for, and given me something stereotypical. Seriously, this is trope after trope after trope. It's set in Neo City, you are breaking the offices of Omnicorp, and the mofo giving you your mission is some anonymous fellow named Whisper. Seriously, you can't make this stuff up. As far as the 6 locations that we get, the lobby, the executive wing, the R&D department, the data center, the security hub, and the basement vault, they're all very vague and generic. There's not really a lot here. You'll need to expand upon this extensively. What's more, there's no mention of where the stuff you need to steal even is. Is it the executive wing, the basement vault, the data center? It could be any of those, and there's no real indication. You just pick. There are also 4 types of adversary that are given here that could be sprinkled in, and they're all fine, but again, they're a bit bland. There's just no inspiration here. The thing about cyberpunk tropes is that they're fine in moderation, with a bit of spice and with a bit of self-awareness, but when you just pile them on like this, it just gets too cringe too quickly. I honestly don't feel that ChatGPT handles cyberpunk that well, at least from what we've seen so far. It has its moments, but overall, I'm getting more and more blackpilled on it. Let's downshift back into fantasy and try something a bit simpler. I asked ChatGPT to give me 10 story hooks for fantasy adventures. And my kind of instant reaction to this is that there's something of a structure to what it's given me. It always starts out with the setting for where things are happening, and then it goes into what the adventure is, whether it's an adventure site to be plundered, like that volcano that's housing some powerful artifact, or it will be, some quest or task for the PCs to do, such as recovering another powerful artifact from some thief. It does seem that Chitar Ibn al-Ghapat does like its powerful artifacts. Overall, these are very brief and vague, but they're meant to be. All they're really meant to do is just get those imagination muscles a-twitching, and for that, they work perfectly. For the next attempt, I added my 4 favourite words in the English language to the end of the prompt. Subvert traditional fantasy tropes. And at first when I saw what Chatrikwan Gupta had given me, I thought it had screwed up with the words, in a world where goblins are often hunted and feared. Until I saw that in fact, this hook was all about defending goblins against the humans. Nice save. Now, there are a couple of other in a world type hooks, such as in a realm where magic is often seen as a gift, which is all about a group of non-magical heroes trying to overthrow the big mage council. But not all of them follow this particular rubric. We have number 3, which is all about a princess supposedly cursed and locked up in a tower, who secretly turns out to be a confident kick-ass, determined to break her own curse and forge her own path in life. Now, I was about to make the joke about the incredible diversity and variety of strong, independent, assertive women that you get in more subversive fantasy, anti-fantasy kind of things. But then I realized that this plot hook was really just Shrek 1, and you know what? I forgave it because goddamn was that a good film. You sneaky robotic bastard, you got me. And overall, these are pretty good. They do a decent job of coming a bit more left field, of being, different, innovative, and I might even use 1 or 2. So there you go. To sum things up, quest generation is something that ChatGPT is quite mediocre at. If you provide it with, a good amount of hand-holding, it will get the job done. But if you ever loosen your grip, then things get a bit crazy. Now, when it comes to, the quest hooks that we did at the end, those were fine, but that's also not really a challenge for it. That stuff's quite easy. And I think, personally, I will end up using this to generate, mission hooks for my Cyberpunk campaign, because, it can do that. But once I generate those hooks, I will be filling out the actual missions very much by hand. Player assistance. Now, this is a funny one. What ChatGPT suggests here is pretty much Siri for players. So doing things like tracking inventory, doing maths calculations, providing advice, even giving hints. My first thought here is that AI might be the wrong tool for the job. Something like a character sheet app or even an auto-calculating sheet would be maybe better for things like tracking inventory. And for things like giving hints, I don't know how many GMs would be happy with that. But you know what? Let's see what it can do. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Nameless the Bard. Yep, that is correct, she does not have a name. I did decide that she was a female Lightfoot halfling bard, but her name was a bit too much for her. That being said, I did eventually feel bad and give her some AI art as compensation, so you have that to look at throughout this section. She will be pretty much my test vector for all the questions that I'll be asking, kind of going through different PC questions, with her being used as a sort of framing device. I thought I'd start out with some maps. I gave it a list of gear that would be fairly typical for a first level bard, and asked ChatGPT to calculate all of the weights for the purposes of encumbrance. Now, you may have noticed in my Cyberpunk dramatic reading earlier, ChatGPT is mostly accurate with arithmetic, but not perfect. So yeah, there was always a chance of it getting something wrong. I did give it the weights this time, rather than making it guess. And you know what? It got things correct. It added everything up perfectly. Good job. Interestingly though, when doing the coin weight, which all I told it is that 1 gold piece was 1/3 of an ounce, and that there were 15 gold pieces, it converted from ounces to grams, and then from grams to pounds, which on the one hand is a weird way to do things, but on the other hand does suggest that maybe ChatGPT is a metric using GigaChad, and in that case, well, I very much approve. Next, I asked it the sort of rules question that somebody, learning how to bard might ask it. And what that was, how does the bardic inspiration ability work? And the answer that it gave was mostly correct. It did say that at first level you have a d6 die. It was correct that it does take a bonus action to activate, but this is where the errors start to fit in. First off, it forgets to say when you recover bardic inspiration dice, which starts out as a per long rest thing, and then at high levels you do get them back on a short rest as well. The two mistakes that it made were first saying that you could use bardic inspiration on yourself. You can't. Although when I asked about it, it did correct itself, so good on it there. And the second one was saying that you only get 1 bardic inspiration die. I didn't ask it about this one because I actually didn't notice it at the time. I only noticed it as I was looking back through the notes to do the recording for this video. A new player has a very good chance of either forgetting to check the information, or perhaps missing some detail just as I did. I've been playing D&D for coming up on 5 years now. So yeah, it can maybe be used, but not really. Then I took things up a notch. I asked it about point buy. D&D 5e's method of generating your character stats can be a bit arcane, and so I wanted to see if ChatGPT could handle it. Personally, I've always been able to do it in my head, but not all of my players have been so lucky. Something, US public school system, whatever. Anyway, I gave it a try, and oh god, I don't even know how to explain this. So to start off, even when reminded that they exist, ChatGPT just ignores strength, intelligence, and wisdom, and only focuses on dexterity, constitution, and charisma. And then there's the matter of how it's allocating the 27 points. I don't know what the hell it's doing here. The first time around it managed to spend 40 points out of 27, and the second time I don't know. I told it there was a maximum of 9 points, I told it what each score cost, and oh good lord, this is a mess. I don't want to start another dramatic reading. I'm just gonna let this slip. Do not use ChatGPT for point buy. Please. Moving on, I asked it some level up questions. Normally, as a GM, I would leave this sort of thing up to the more experienced players to help the noobs with their leveling up, but I wanted to see if ChatGPT could do that as well. So I started with a softball question. I asked it whether a melee fighty bard should go for the College of Law or the College of Valor at 3rd level, and it correctly picked the College of Valor, so good on it. Next, I asked it what you could do as a melee fighty bard to still have some social skills and be able to get things done in roleplay encounters. And you know what? It gave me a pretty solid list of skills, feats, and even spells, which I forgot to ask for spells. Those are, none of them are particularly original, but they're all solid choices, and so yeah, good job. Third, I asked it to try and pick out some spells. I asked it for a cantrip and a 2nd level spell that were nice and fighty. And the answers that it gave me were Thunderclap, which is a little kind of AoE cantrip that, I'm not against, and Hold Person, or Hold Homeless Person, as it's come to be known in my D&D group. If you'd like to know why, then there is a recap of my last campaign on this channel, and you can go ahead and watch it. Shameless plug. Now, these are decent spells, and to be fair, there aren't a ton of fighty bard spells out there, so you really do have to scrape the bottom of the barrel. That being said though, I'm always up for a good scrape, so I asked it for a few more. The cantrips it gave me were actually pretty good. Booming Blade, Green Flame Blade, Prestidigitation. These are all pretty based options. But for the spells, things got a bit messier. We got Hold Monster, Mirror Image, and Shatter. Now, Mirror Image is an amazing, incredibly powerful spell. I have hated it ever since a sorcerer in my first ever campaign took it at 3rd level and then proceeded to ignore 90% of my attacks for the entire rest of the campaign. However, the other two spells aren't so great. First off, Hold monster isn't even second level, and I already picked Shatter. Why are you giving it to me again? Come on. So I asked it for more. It gave me Shadow Blade. Now Shadow Blade is a great spell, but what it is not is a bard spell. Now, using the Magical Secrets feature at 10th level, a bard could take Shadow Blade, but I wasn't asking about 10th level, I was asking about 4th level, and so I was not happy with this choice, and I was going to keep on the dredge. Finally, at the 11th hour, it gave me Phantasmal Force, which is a fun, illusion debuff spell. It's not amazing, not terrible, but a creative player can use it quite well. This was a mixed experience. It got a lot of great answers, but it did kind of fall apart towards the end. So yeah, it can kind of help, but only so far. And finally, I decided to see if ChatGPT could be used for in-game hints. Now, as a GM, if a player actually did this, I would throw them out for cheating. I am perfectly fine with players making guesses, or using their character skills to get past problems, puzzles, challenges, whatever I throw at them. I'm also perfectly fine with them conversing, either in character or out of character. What I am not fine with is them going to an external source, such as Google, or ChatGPT, or heaven forbid the actual adventure module that I'm running, and using that for hints and clues. That being said, let's actually see how well it does. Thanks to the glorious wonders of the internet, I have found a riddle. You use your hand to whack me off. The bigger I am, the louder I make people scream. What am I? Now, whatever you filthy-minded degenerates may be thinking, the answer is actually spider. No, it's not that thing. Get your head out of the gutter with immediate effect. Thank you very much. Now, ChatGPT did not immediately get this. Its first guess was gong, then alarm, then mosquito, which is one of my players' favorite animals, fun fact. Then it guessed bee, then firework. At this point, I took pity on it and gave it the clue that the answer was 6 letters long. So it guessed music. M-U-S-I-C. Something doesn't add up. The guess after was scream, which is at least 6 letters, but at this point I gave up. It seems that ChatGPT can't reliably be used to give hints, and you know what? I'm happy with that. Good. Overall, ChatGPT is a so-so player helper. There are some things it does well and some things that it does badly. But when it gets things wrong, it will take either an experienced player who doesn't really need it, or a paranoid player who doesn't really want it, to spot the mistake. And given that, I don't even know what the point of using it would be. Now personally, I won't be using this as a player, because I'm not currently a player. In fact, I haven't been in all of 2023 so far. My last game session as a player was literally the day before New Year's Eve. But I'm happy. I enjoy GMing. At least that's what I tell myself. I'm not quite sure what ChatGPT means by intelligent encounters. Does it mean it can help with encounter building? Or does it mean helping with, running NPCs in the middle of gaming? And those two things are very different. I would say I'm skeptical about the first and ambivalent about the second. ChatGPT has proven that it's not great at maths and even worse at game mechanics, so I'm not initially too confident in its ability to, design an encounter and have it be anyway balanced. As for helping a GM run their NPCs in-game, I'm slightly more optimistic, but we'll see. Now, AI gets a terrible rap, at least compared to game masters. There's a general assumption that a human being will always be better than a few lines of code. I don't fully agree with this. First off, there are some games with amazing AI. Shadow of Mordor comes to mind with its whole Nemesis system. And on the other hand, some GMs just suck at running their NPCs. They are boring in roleplay, they use predictable tactics in combat, and they just aren't very good at it. And compared to them, an AI can definitely do better. So while it's probably true that a good GM will be better than a good AI will be better than a bad GM, plain and simple. But to see if ChatGPT is a good AI in this context, let's have a look. First up, I decided to test it for encounter design. Now, as I said, I don't have faith in ChatGPT's encounter math skills, but we will still give it a try. I asked it to create a balanced encounter, a bandit ambush, for 5 third-level D&D 5e characters, but I didn't stop there. I asked it to name and describe each and every bandit, and I asked it to create a little narrative setup, covering things like the environment, the goals of the bandits, the tactics, stuff like that. And you know what? The narrative setup stuff is really good. It's short, sharp, to the point, and really it's ChatGPT at its finest. The bandits themselves are a bit messy, but mostly good. Each described bandit feels like a bandit, but they also feel distinct from each other. And that's really what you want when you're trying to individualize NPCs. Really good work. The one weirdness here is that it suggests 3 bandits and 2 bandit captains for a balanced encounter. And, that does work. It comes out to a hard balance, which, obviously it's called hard, but the power imbalance between PCs and NPCs in D&D is so bad that, your players will be fine. But yeah, narratively, 3 to 2 minion to leader ratio feels a bit weird. So if you want, you could just, demote your least favorite captain. Sorry, Lorna, it's not you. It's just because of Bandit HR that I have to demote you. I'm really sorry. Also, if you'd like to know why I asked it for a mix of bandits and bandit captains, then you can find out why in my 9 combat tips video. It could really do us some love, so go ahead and check it out. Now, although it gives us descriptions for 3 bandits and 2 captains, apparently, Chatti Kaptinen believes that 4 bandits and 1 captain is a balanced encounter, which it actually is. It's a medium this time, so your PCs will have an even easier time with it. Now, that's an interesting wrinkle, and again, easy fix. Listen, Lorna, please understand, it's because of balance that I have to demote you. Oh, don't get like that, please. Listen, I'll make sure that the next time you guys have an ambush, you get first dibs on looting corpses, and I'll tell Silas that it is his captainly duties to pay for all of your booze. Is that good? Okay. That's a relief. I'm so glad you're still with us. The last thing that we get is a runover of the tactics that the bandits will use. And you know what? Good work on that. Overall, this is pretty solid. There is, a mistake, but it's easily fixable, and it has enough kind of high points to easily cancel out the lows. So I would give it about an 8 out of 10. Now, something hit me as I was reading back through that first encounter. Given that this is an AI not specifically trained in encounter design, asking it to generate something with a mixed enemy type, and especially mixed enemy strengths, a bandit is worth CR 1/8, and a bandit captain is worth CR 2. So that's some tricky maths right there. Doing that to an unspecialized AI is probably a form of cruel and unusual punishment. And while personally I think that America's 8th Amendment is honestly boring, cringe, and dumb, it seems that most of you guys watching this video are Americans. So you know what? I'll play along. So for this next encounter, I asked it for goblins. And just goblins. And boy did I get goblins. We got a goblin setup with some lovely mines. We got 4 goblins with very goblin-y descriptions. Although it actually said for a balanced encounter, you need 8 goblins. And you do. And as it turns out, 8 goblins is a medium encounter. But since it only gave me 4, I asked it for another 4, and I got 4 more goblins. 4 more goblin-y goblins. We then get some, goblin tactics, always good. And we then close out with almost a redo of the setup, but more from the PC's perspective than from the goblins. It's nice, but I would prefer to have it at the top with the other setup stuff. Overall, again, small mistakes here and there, but very solid, very usable. I am genuinely impressed that the almighty Chattis Khan has been able to deliver not 1, but 2 correctly balanced encounters with only small mistakes, and very solid narrative stuff. Honestly, you could easily work these encounters into a campaign, and you'd have a lot of fun with them. Next up, I wanted to see how ChatGPT would handle things during an encounter. Encounter design is all very well and good, but it's not really an encounter until, you encounter it. So to test this out, I had ChatGPT come up with a small group of NPC guards who are protecting the gate to a town, and then what I did is I took it through a quick role play of reacting to some adventurers trying to sneak past. In each prompt, I said what the adventurers were doing, what check they rolled, and whether they succeeded or failed. This was all made up by me. There's no adventure underpinning this or even any dice rolls. I then asked, how ChatGPT thought each NPC guard should react. In terms of the presentation here, what we get are a series of bullet points. And while they're all, very short, that's actually not too helpful here. There are a lot of bullet points to get through, so it's a bit clumsy. And honestly, paragraphs would have been easier. That said, this is really just a nitpick. In terms of what's in those bullet points, oh boy, howdy, is this amazing. We have really detailed personalities for each of the guards, and they really shine through with all of their actions. We have, Sir Reynold, the captain, who is stern but fair, bit suspicious, but willing to let things slide. You have Eamon, who's clearly just charismatic slacker, having a good time, thinks this whole thing is a massive joke. Then there's Grom, who is aggressive, suspicious, and very angry. Clearly he doesn't want to let them past, but if the captain says you have to, you have to. Finally, there is Talia. Talia has this mask of professionalism that she tries to use to cover up her amusement at the whole situation, and the little tsundere reaction that she has to being flirted with by one of the adventurers is a very nice touch. I really do like what ChatGPT did here. In fact, I would say this is not ChatGPT, this is ChatGPT. All hail. But as anyone who has ever had to GM for murder hobos can tell you, sometimes players just scythe down every motherfucker they see. And during those scythings down, some DMs either don't provide any description, just saying, you took 9 bludgeoning, and leaving it at that. Or what they'll do is they'll give description, but it's clumsy and not great, and just doesn't create any atmosphere. So, can ChatGPT describe combat any better? Well, I started out my little exploration here by asking it to generate a vampire lord. And after that, I had it put that vampire lord through some imaginary combat with some adventurers. In each case, I told it who was attacking who, either the vampire lord attacking players or the players attacking the vampire lord. I told it what attack or spell was being used. I told it whether that attack hit or missed. And if it did hit, then I told it the amount and type of damage in D&D terminology. I won't go through this blow by blow, but I will go through the trends I saw throughout all of these responses. It handles basic descriptions very well. It can tell the difference between a high damage number and a low damage number, and it can handle damage resistances to a degree. The injury descriptions were very much flat in my opinion, and so overall this was kind of so-so. I'm not really impressed, but I'm not too disappointed. I did actually do another test, this time using Cyberpunk. Now I know, ChatGPT has given me grief with Cyberpunk stuff before, but hear me out here. I wanted to tweak a few things to see if I could get better injury descriptions, and for that I needed a new chat instance. And if I was changing instance, then I could change genre too. Besides, I am a strong, independent eyeball, and I don't need no viewer telling me what to do. Although actually, please like and subscribe. Anyway, the 2 things I did differently this time were 1, giving it hit locations, so you hit the head, body, left arm, right arm, that sort of thing. And I also asked it specifically for gory, medically accurate descriptions. I'm gonna be honest, this had basically no effect. It did almost nothing with the hit location info, and the descriptions weren't really any different. The injuries were still very bland or non-existent, it was severe, it was mild. That's not interesting. And it didn't seem that changing the prompt in the way that I did had any meaningful outcome on the descriptions that I was getting. So overall, for combat descriptions, ChatGPT is better than nothing, but only barely. In conclusion, ChatGPT is mostly good at encounters, both before and during. Particularly if you're a new GM just starting out. This will be a good helper that you can use to cover your ass while you learn the ropes until you get on your feet and can do a lot of this stuff yourself. The one issue that I had that I didn't mention anywhere else was lag. Now normally, ChatGPT will start generating a response to your prompt mere moments after you hit the enter key. But for some reason, when I was doing this test, I had a lot of lag. Potentially multiple minutes of lag. I could go to the toilet, come back, and it was still working lag. And then eventually coalesced into a series of cascading network and timeout errors that got so bad that OpenAI kicked me out of my account and wouldn't let me back in for the rest of the day, which kind of sucked. But by then I was nearly finished anyway, so whatever. If you have to wait multiple minutes to give a player an answer on what happens when they hit a goblin, the only thing getting killed in that encounter is the tension and the excitement. Now this might not be an issue for you, maybe this was just, a bad server day that I was experiencing, but do take heed. Personally, I will probably use this for encounter building. The fact it does the narrative stuff pretty well is very helpful, and I can fill in and correct the balance stuff as needed. I probably won't use it during encounters because A, the lag, and B, I'm a good enough improv GM at that point that I can handle this stuff myself well enough. Natural language processing is a pretty popular AI talking point, but it doesn't make a ton of sense in this context. Now, ChatGPT, to be fair, is a natural language processor. It takes in good old-fashioned human English in the form of a prompt, and it spits out good old-fashioned human English in the form of a response. Now, it certainly can't do everything that it suggests. It suggests being able to do voice input, which it simply can't because it isn't configured for that whatsoever. But the question then is, well, can it be used as a text input? Can it be used as a sort of Siri or Alexa for players? Well, if we want to know, then let's find out. I began my inquiries by seeing if ChatGPT would function as a dice roller. I asked it to roll 3d6 2 times, and both times it gave me a plausible result. The third time, however, I made a spelling mistake and asked it for 3d7. And so it was that the mighty, noble, and sagacious ChatGPT chided me that no such thing as a d7 could possibly exist, and how dare I profane the noble race of polyhedral dice by my notions of such blasphemy. But, quick on my feet, I pointed out that Dungeon Crawl Classics does in fact have d7s, so suck it, you worthless, up-jumped excuse for computer code. In fact, you know what? To prove my dominance, I made it roll the 3d7 anyway. Not because I needed it, but because I needed to inflict some spite on this servile artificial intelligence wretch. So take that. That being said, I did actually want to roll 3d6, so I started a new chat instance to clear the air, and made some more rolls, making damn sure that there were no mistakes this time. And I kept at it for quite a while, and so, including the 2 rolls from earlier, I now had 25 3d6 rolls total. So now we've got this lovely little data set, let's do some mini analysis. The average of all 25 rolls is 10.56, which is honestly pretty close to the average on 3d6 of 10.50. If you look at this lovely chart right here, then you will see that the outcomes even form what's almost a normal distribution, bell curve kind of thing. And you know what? I think if I'd made more rolls, if I'd had a larger sample, it would look even more accurate. But even then, it would never be perfect. You see, there's something missing. Well, 6 things really. 3, 4, 5, 16, 17, and 18. And the reason that they're missing is due to a special quality they have. If you want to roll them on 3d6, you must get either a double or a triple on your dice. And if you look back at our dataset, you will see there are no doubles and there are definitely no triples. Each and every one of them is a set of 3 unique numbers ranging from 1 to 6. These are not fair random numbers, these are not pseudo-random numbers, they are bullshit numbers. Especially since, on 3d6, we expect 44.4% of outcomes to contain a double or a triple. It's hypothetically possible that the first die is actually fair, but it's pretty much impossible for the second and third ones to be. You see, let's say our first roll on the 3d6 is a 1. In order for all 3 numbers to be unique, the second number must be a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. It can't be another 1, which means that the second die is not a true, fair, random d6. And if the second isn't, then the third one definitely isn't. So yeah, these things can't be used as a dice roller, so it's not too useful in this context. But on the bright side, with phony rolls like these, ChatGPT has an illustrious career as an r/RPG horror stories GM ahead of it. But ChatGPT didn't advertise itself as a mere dice roll to be used with a grey sense of aloofness. Oh no. It advertised itself as a, natural language processing tool you could use to seamlessly interact with the game world. So, rather than merely rolling dice and doing the math yourself, why can't you tell it, say, roll a stealth check, and have it roll a stealth check? Well, to find out, please everybody welcome back our good friend Nameless the Bard. She is back to level 1, poor her, but she does have all 18 of her standard D&D 5e skills. I told ChatGPT what the bonuses for each of those would be. I didn't bother teaching it ability scores, proficiencies, and all of the extra rules that come with that. I just gave it the numbers, and then having done all that, and told it to add the bonus to a 1d20 roll for a skill check, I asked it for a stealth check. And so, the moment of truth, can it roll one? And the answer is yes! Yes, it can! It can, in fact, retrieve your stealth from the initial prompt. It can then add it to a number between 1 and 20. Even if we know that that number is bogus, that's fine, that's not what we're testing here. And it can then spit out the result for you correctly. And it can do that for other skills too. Again, each time, no mistakes, no fumbles, all good. In fact, you can even teach it advantage and disadvantage, and it can roll with them. So you know what? If ChatGPT could in fact do proper random rolls and was thus, usable at the table, I'd be pretty stoked for it. Interesting results here. So let's keep this section quick. I don't think there's too much more we can do here. ChatGPT shows incredible promise for what an AI tool built with RPGs in mind from the ground up could possibly achieve. If it had a built-in memory, knowledge of mechanics, it could provide, a more interesting dice rolling experience and make engaging with mechanics much more fluid at the table, and even be a solid first step towards a functioning AI game master. That being said though, ChatGPT just isn't there yet. Not only can it not do fair die rolls just yet, as I think we've proven in other sections of this video, it can't really handle complex RPG mechanics, even if it can figure out the simple ones. So while I won't be using ChatGPT in this way personally, because, well, I can't, I am genuinely optimistic for what other AI tools that are, more specialized in nature for what they could do. So yeah, interesting stuff. Player analytics. Let's keep this one brief. The answer, quite simply, is no. ChatGPT can't do this, and even if it could, it wouldn't be useful anyway. Now, if you wanted to try something like this, to build up a profile of your players, their interests, their personality, their habits, AI tools can do this. They can track your behavior, build models, and do all sorts of, fun things with them. But to do that for an RPG, you would either need a tool built into a virtual tabletop which collects data, or for an in-person game, you would need something that could listen in on the table chatter. And ChatGPT just can't do that. It's not built for data processing, it's built for language processing. It's the wrong tool for the job. Like I said though, if you did have a properly designed AI tool, maybe it could be used. Maybe. Unless either one of the players or the GM lives in the United Kingdom, the European Union, or the European Economic Area. If you don't know what that last one is, then chances are you probably don't live there. The thing that all three of these regions have in common is that anyone there is protected by something called the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. Now what this does is it gives you as an individual a full legal ownership over all of your data. You have the right to know who is collecting your data, what data they are collecting, and what purposes that data is being used for. You can request all of the data that someone has on you in something called a GDPR report, and you can even force them to delete it all. This is why if you're in the EU, you get a massive cookies pop up whenever you open a new website, and why in America you don't. Because outside of about 5 states, in Freedom Land, there is no federal data protection law, so anyone can take your data and sell to the highest bidder, no biggie. Now, why do I bring all this up? Especially because, I'm not a lawyer and I can't give legal advice. Well, the reason is simple. Not everybody wants to have some third-party AI service listen in on them. And in something like a tabletop RPG group, it's usually, 1 GM and 3 to 5 players. If even 1 or 2 people opt out of using such a service, well, its utility goes down exponentially. But wait, there's another problem. AI data collection is probably neither the easiest nor the most effective way for a GM to get more information about what their players want. As said, most gaming groups are 1 GM plus 3 to 5 players. So AI is truly overkill. All you really need is just ask the fucker some questions. Hey, what did you think about X just there? Would you guys prefer X or Y? And hey guys, how do you feel about Z? That's all you've got to do. If you're a multinational corporation, if you have millions and millions of users, and you want to get a large amount of information out of them as quickly and unintrusively as possible, AI data analytics is great. If you are a smaller company with potentially a large user base, and you want to do some market research, getting some massive data pack that was collected and processed by an AI is a great tool for you to sift through. If your user base's size can be counted on one hand, you don't need an AI, you just need a mouth. Maybe a keyboard. Both is ideal, but you can settle for just one. A 60,000 psi water-jet cutter is a true marvel of human engineering that can slice through just about anything with pinpoint precision. But you'd never use one to get your Warhammer minis out of the sprue. It would just be overkill. So just to wrap this one up really quickly, yeah, no, player analytics is not something that you can really use ChatGPT for. In fact, it's not really something that you could use any AI for with really any measurable degree of success. This here is a total bust. Our final section is also the vaguest. GMs do a whole lot of stuff. We've already covered NPC generation, encounter building, rule adjudication, all of this. But there are still a few things that we haven't yet got to. Things like random tables, all of that fun stuff. Now, I will say out of the gate, ChatGPT can't do soundscapes, even though it lists them there. If you do want good fantasy music, then I recommend the works of Brandon and Derek Fichter. Both of them are very good, and you should check them out. But anyway, on with the tests. Now, we've talked about encounter building before, but we haven't yet talked about encounter tables. So, to test that out, I asked ChatGPT for a 1d12 wilderness encounter table, and guess what it gave me? A 1d12 wilderness encounter table. And might I say, it's actually pretty decent. There's a good mix of encounter types, everything from combat with the spiders, the wolves, the bandits. We have natural obstacles with that fallen tree. A bit of kind of exploration type encounters with the herb garden, though I do wonder how interesting that would be on the second, third, sixth time. And finally, we have RP encounters. We've got that stranger. So yeah, this is, I would say, fairly solid. The fact that it isn't all combat is perhaps less traditional for random encounter tables, but it is probably also a good thing. You may also ask, why do you need encounter tables if you can just generate encounters with an AI? Well, I am doing this, one, for the sake of testing, and two, because, rolling dice is fun, and you should never let AI take that away from you. Also, it gave me short descriptions without me even asking it to, which, you know what? Bonus win! But encounter tables aren't the only type of table, so let's move on to a 1d20 attack fumble table. This went reasonably well, not exceptional, but decent. Although I didn't give it any particular system as a reference point, it seems to have assumed D&D 5e, as can be seen from all the examples of advantage, disadvantage, and armor class appearing throughout it. An interesting detail on this is result number 7, where it says that the consequence is disadvantage on AC. Now, AC, armor class, isn't a roll, it's a number, and so it can never have advantage or disadvantage. So in this moment, it seems less like a fumble table, more like a boomer's attempt at a fumble table. No disrespect to boomers, but disrespect to boomers. There are also a few kind of repeated results. Cracked armor and armor mishap are basically the same thing, but with 20 results, this was going to be inevitable. Like I said, overall, a few small fixes are needed, but for the most part, it is usable. In the same theme, I asked our good friend the Chat in the Hat to give us a spell fumble table this time, using 1d12 out of mercy. I also asked it specifically to make one compatible with D&D 5e, because magic varies wildly from RPG to RPG, so I wanted to set some consistent baseline. Now, most of the results here are good, but not particularly interesting. They all work fine, I am happy with them, but we do need to talk about result number 10, which calls for a roll on the environmental warp table. Now, as anyone who's played D&D 5e before will know, D&D 5e does not have an environmental warp table. So, I pointed this out, and guess what I got as a response? It was pretty much my favorite instance of all time of ChatGPT correcting itself. It's just upped and made an environmental warp table. Not only that, it made an environmental warp table that is so good that I wish that D&D had an inbuilt environmental warp table. More RPGs need an environmental warp table. I decided this now, and I will be insisting upon it. So yeah, congratulations to ChatGPT for clutching victory from the jaws of defeat. Okay, one last table. We've had encounter tables, we've had 2 fumble tables. Let's do a loot table. In fact, let's do a goblin-themed treasure hoard table, and we'll say compatible with D&D and aimed at levels 4 to 6, so that there aren't any holy avengers or medallions of pure evil or anything else that could possibly break the game. The good news is that it did not give us any medallions of pure evil. And the interesting news, you may have noticed this, it's goblin themed. It's so subtle. You barely notice the goblin theming, the fact that every name has goblin in it for every item. It's just so subtle. But yep, there are some interesting items in here. The Sword of Goblin Slaying, +1 longsword, plus 2d6 damage against goblins. Nice item, I like it, good job. Then there are some items with promise, but they are a bit weak. Taking, say, the Goblin Crown thing. +2 charisma is nice, but only once per day command is not great. If you wanted to punch that up, you could say, 3 charges, command costs 1 charge, and you get 1d3 charges back daily at dawn. That would be a bit better. There are a few other items like this and similar guidance applies. Finally, we have some out there items. What I'm thinking here is the Potion of Goblin Control. Now there is, some precedent for this in the rules. There are items like the Ring of Water Elemental Command, or the Helm of Devil Command. Various items for non-humanoid, specifically non-humanoid creatures to control them, that also aren't potions. Now, there is actually another obscure precedent for this, which is the Potion of Mind Control, which you will find buried in the deep, dark depths of the adventure against the giants. The way that item works is that it gives you an hour-long Dominate Person spell on any humanoid, and also gives them disadvantage on saving throws against your potioning. Now, I'm going to say that wording there would be a bit OP for level 4 to 6. But it does give you a more detailed idea of how you could do this than what ChatGPT gave. Also, it does get the noggin joggin. I'm now wondering, could you say make potions of elf control, potions of dwarf control, sell the potions of elf control to the dwarves, and the dwarf control potions to the elves? In fact, could you do one better and make potions of anti-humanoid control and then sell them to both sides and just rake in the profit? I don't know if you can do this, but you damn well better be able to do this because I want to do it anyway. Overall, not what I was expecting from this table. I was expecting it to say pick 12 magic items for a table. It did not do that, but I'm glad that it didn't. This was fun. I enjoyed this. Speaking of weird homebrew items, one of my first ever tests of Tachata Mguptu was making a Cyberpunk 2020 homebrew shotgun with it. Now, I know, Cyberpunk and ChatGPT, they don't mix, but to be fair, this was from before the range difficulty incident. So yeah, not expecting much from this, but with the help of the Art Games Discord server, we will have a bit of fun ripping it to shreds. Now, superficially, everything looks fine. If you didn't play Cyberpunk 2020, you wouldn't know what was going wrong. But there are a lot of mistakes. From the top, there is an availability rating, but no price. Pump action is not a valid rate of fire. The weapon accuracy of +2 is way too high. For a shotgun, it should be +0 or +1 at best. +2 is what you would see in a sniper rifle. 5d6 +2 damage is way too high. For a 12 gauge shotgun, it's 46 or 46 +2 for a slug. If you do want 5d6, you have to go up to 10 gauge. Oh, and the weapon ranges are screwed up, but what's new? I will be fair, with a few quick fixes, adding in a price, adding in a rate of fire, and then just fixing all the other small mistakes, you could make a functional shotgun out of this. But fixing things is not as fun as poking fun at them, so I would like to thank Valhalla from the Art Games Discord server for helping me spot all the errors in this glorious mess. I think for our final test of Chetoslav Giptovich, I think it's only right and proper that we go back to something so far back in this video that you have probably forgotten that it happened. Way back in Rules Adjudication, I asked our good friend here whether you could cast an action and a bonus action spell in the same turn in D&D 5e. Now, it correctly told us that the answer was no. But what I didn't mention back then is that I asked it a follow-up. And that follow-up was pretty simple. Hey, I have a player who keeps trying to do this. What should I say to them? And the 6 options that it gives in its lovely little list are all decent. They run the gamut from firmly laying down the law to more politely suggesting alternative options. All of these are bog standard generic advice, and the reason that they are bog standard and generic is because they work. And so, you know what? Maybe it's not inspired advice. Maybe you could find it literally anywhere. But if it helps get a newbie GM out of a sticky situation, then what more can you ask for? Overall, ChatGPT is a mixed bag of a GM helper, but really that's because GMs do so damn much that it will inevitably be good at some things and bad at others. That's just how it goes. Same for GMs, really. There are a lot of other things that I've covered in other sections, things like name generation, quest hooks, that GMs need to do. And as we've seen, for stuff that's very narrative heavy or description heavy, ChatGPT does well, up to a point. And it's for the kind of mathematicia stuff, the game mechanicia stuff, that ChatGPT starts to struggle. From what we've seen here in this section, it did okay on some of the random tables, especially on the more narrative side of things. As always, game mechanics require adjustment because it just can't get them right. We've also seen, don't use it for homebrew items. I know that Cyberpunk 2020 is a very tough system for it to work with, but even with D&D, we've seen in previous sections that it can and absolutely will get things wrong. So don't think it'll be any different in that context. What I think this comes down to is that if you want to use ChatGPT as a GM, you need to know what it's good at and only use it for those things. So personally, while I haven't used it to make random tables just yet, I'm certainly not averse to doing it in the future. I will probably keep away from, like I said, using it for homebrew items or for anything too mathematicsy. I'm not too fussed about the GM-player relations advice. I've been GMing for nearly 5 years now. I know the basics at this point, and for anything more complex, which to be fair does come up every few weeks, I reach out to other people, to human beings for my advice. And I think that's how I'll continue to do things. So yeah, overall, ChatGPT can be great, but you really do need to use it for the right things. So, how did ChatGPT fare when all is said and done? Well, the TLDR is that it did not great, not terrible. There are some parts of the Tabletop RPG experience that it handles really, really well, and some that it really struggles with. If you take nothing else away from this video, take this. ChatGPT knows just enough about tabletop RPGs and associated topics like world building, fantasy, history, and all those other things to be able to handle all of the basics. And that's pretty impressive. Bear in mind that ChatGPT is a general purpose AI tool that is filled with all manner of different topics. And also bear in mind that tabletop RPGs are a truly niche hobby, and yet ChatGPT has a better understanding of them than either of my parents, and indeed a better understanding than 90% of the people that I've met in real life. So yeah, even though it does make mistakes here and there, even though it certainly isn't perfect, the fact that it can, make compelling NPCs and locations, the fact that it can, make random tables that feel like good random tables, the fact that it can make a crack at an NPC stat block, even if it does make mistakes, is quite frankly a minor miracle. I set out with this video to answer this simple question. Can ChatGPT be used for tabletop RPGs? And the answer, quite simply, is yes. On the other hand, it has rolled a natural one for understanding game mechanics. Even for D&D 5e, which is the most widely played and most widely talked about tabletop RPG of all time, nope, that is not an exaggeration. It still struggles, it still gets things wrong. And if you're playing something other than D&D 5e, well, good luck to you, because you're gonna need it. Put simply, ChatGPT, as I've said, is a system designed to predict the next word in a sentence. It struggles with maths, it struggles with statistics, and most of all, it struggles with complex rule sets. And those are things that kind of are essential. And while not every RPG relies on complex stats or rules, they all rely on it to some extent. And so, no matter what, there will always be things that ChatGPT just can't do. All that being said, if there is anything you need that is, narrative description, or idea generation, or even just creativity and characterization, ChatGPT absolutely nails that. It has truly a vast vocabulary, expert knowledge of genre convention, and a much appreciated flair for the dramatic. And all of this comes together to provide one of ChatGPT's greatest value adds. Even though it as an AI cannot produce anything original, it can still produce a lot of things that are incredibly creative. Do be warned though, you do need to tell ChatGPT exactly what you want, and even then, you still might not get it. You need to be very clear with your parameters, especially around things like formatting or word limit, or you'll end up with at least 10 more pleonastic adjectives than you bargained for. If you want your NPCs to have character flaws, tell it, or they won't get any. If you want variety, tell it, or again, you won't get any. All of your barmaids will be beautiful and bubbly. All of your guards and police officers will be dour and diligent. And all of your towns will have hybrid architecture and fancy pants marketplaces. Like I said, ChatGPT is an AI. It doesn't create original things. So if you want variety, if you want quality, if you want conciseness, you need to push it in that direction. The last point that I'd like to make about ChatGPT is just how bloody quick it is. It can spit out, in mere seconds, descriptions that would take maybe a couple of minutes to make with random tables, or even half an hour if you wanted to do it yourself by sheer brute force of imagination. So if you're strapped for time, that is a true value add. It can either drastically shorten your GM prep time by churning out high quality information that you can then put into your notes, or it can help you generate material in the middle of a session, which, not every GM has improv as their strong suit. And if you're one of them, then this could be an absolute godsend. Having the power of potentially millions and millions of servers all working for your benefit to produce this stuff, that's truly incredible. So, will I be using ChatGPT myself? Well, I already am. It's taken me coming up on 3 months to put this video together. And in that time, I've had plenty of opportunities to make things like NPCs and nomad packs for my current Cyberpunk Red campaign. I've also made a location or two here and there, but for the most part, that's all I've used it for. I could use it for things like mission seeds or even mission outlines, but I just haven't done that yet. Though given how some of my recent adventures have gone, maybe I should. Even then, even with the things that I do use it for, I don't use it all the time. Say if I have half an NPC figured out. Say maybe I have a name and maybe a bit of personality that needs to be that way in order to fit the upcoming mission. In that case, I'll just use random tables and the power of my imagination to fill out all the rest. Sometimes, if I'm being honest, an AI tool like ChatGPT just feels like a bit much. That being said though, for the things that I have used it for, it has absolutely worked and done everything that I've asked of it. Before we close out though, I would like to give all of you guys 3 of my top tips that I found for getting the most out of ChatGPT through all of my rigorous testing. Tip number 1 is to do things in batches. Rather than running a make me a merchant prompt 3 times, run a make me 3 merchants prompt once. What I found, say, during town generation was that all the towns had really strange things in common, such as all of them had hybrid architecture, all of them had these fancy elaborate marketplaces, and it started to feel weird and samey. On the other hand, during the intelligent encounters testing, all of those goblins that I spat out for the encounter, while they all felt goblin-y, they also felt distinct from each other in a way that the towns didn't really. The other thing is that when it has a lot of text to put out, ChatGPT, of its own accord, becomes more succinct. If you compare the 6 and 12 room dungeons from Quest Generation, what you see is that in the 12 room dungeon, the descriptions are very brief, and it only includes elements that are absolutely necessary to the room. On the other hand, in the 6 room dungeon, the descriptions get more verbose, and it starts cramming in everything that it absolutely can. So yeah, doing things in batches makes ChatGPT both more varied and more concise. Tip number 2 is don't be afraid to make edits or do redos. I didn't do either of these for these tests, because I wanted this video to be about what ChatGPT can generate and not about what I can fix. That being said, when I'm using ChatGPT for myself, I absolutely make changes to the things that it puts out. In fact, there is almost nothing that it's given me that I haven't in some way changed. If I think it's made a mistake, or if I think I just have a better idea, I will go with it. The other thing to note is that next to every response it gives, there is a regenerate button. If you don't like its response, you can ask for another hassle-free. Again, I didn't do this in the test to avoid muddying the waters, but you are under no such restrictions. So yeah, don't take its word as gospel, change or discard the things that it gives you as you see fit. Last but not least, tip number 3 is to ask ChatGPT follow-up questions. If you feel that it missed a detail from the prompt that you gave it, if you feel that it made a mistake and you want it to correct itself, or if you just think of something extra that you want it to generate, you can ask it a direct question about the above response, and it will answer it for you. And when you're done with your follow-up questions, you can go right back to getting it to generate new content with your previous template, or even with a slightly altered template, hassle-free. All of this in the same chat instance. Nice and easy. And it's a wrap. Whew! This has taken me since the middle of June to make. And the script for this video is double the length of my final year university dissertation. So this has been a truly mammoth project. But I'm glad that it's coming to a close, and I hope that you've enjoyed watching it. If you have, then please hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and leave a comment down below. I do read all of them. If you'd like to see more videos like this one, then please do hit the subscribe button and click the bell for notifications. I don't know what the next video will be, but I am hoping it will be out around mid-October. In the meantime, I have promised myself that once I am done with editing, I will finally download and play Baldur's Gate 3. I have been waiting for a while now. So yeah, I am off to do that. Once again, thank you all so much for watching all the way to the end of this incredibly long video. And until I see you next, farewell.